Mike Natalizio here from HNI. Welcome to this HNI University webinar titled Big Data Meets Performance Management for Drivers. Very excited about today and the content, and thank you for signing on. We're going to get started. A couple of housekeeping items. I know a lot of you want to get a slide deck, so that slide deck will be posted on our website after the webinar. I want you to go ahead and use your question screen. You can type in questions throughout the presentation. We'll be fielding those and then answering those questions at the end of the session. So go ahead and type in that chat window, and we'll collect those questions as we go. If you're a social media enthusiast, you can tweet at HNI Risk Service, use the hashtag HNIU, and who knows, you might even win some HNI swag. So go ahead and do that. All right, we also have some sponsors that help make HNI University possible. On the screen you see some of our sponsors. In fact, you see all of our sponsors on the screen, so thank you to them. Some of them have joined us today as well. So today, myself, Mike Natalizio, I'm CEO of HNI. I'll be part of the presentation team. We also have Dominique Bodin. She's our Director of IT here at HNI. And then Don Gerald, who's our Transportation Advisory individual at HNI. We'll be the ones presenting to you today. Let's start out with the wicked problem. If you're an HNI customer or you've been following HNI, you know we like to talk about the wicked problems. The wicked problems are the kind of problems that you can't write a check and make them go away. In order to solve a wicked problem, somebody somewhere is going to have to start to change their behaviors. And so we're going to turn this over to Don Gerald, who's solved a lot of wicked problems in his day, or at least he's seen them. And Don, why don't you talk about the wicked problem as you see it?
Thank you, Mike. You know, one of the challenges that we see, we go to a lot of trucking organizations and get to see them. I guess the advantage is we get to see things from the 10,000-foot snapshot. And a lot of times, and coming from a trucking background myself, I know some of the things that happens on the management side is, you know, we come into these roles as managers and leaders, and we have all this excitement, and we have all these plans on what we're going to do and how we're going to get things accomplished. And then before you know it, we're wrapped up in the day-to-day activities, and we catch ourselves doing things just like, you know, definition of insanity is doing things the same way and expecting different results, but lo and behold, we're right back to doing things just like we always have. And our world's changing. Our world's changing dramatically out there. We certainly have a massive driver shortage, and the driver shortage is not going to go away. And we have to come up with innovative ways of addressing this driver shortage. We have to try to figure out what's causing it. Another challenge that I see a lot of times in trucking companies is you have so many good people working for you, and you have them all in different capabilities and different roles, but it's like they're fragmented. Each department is doing their own thing. Each department, they're not all intertwined with each other. They're not all pulling the same direction. I've got good people in operations. They're working on moving freight. They're working on not having service failures. I've got a safety department. They're working on the safety stuff. I've got maintenance. I've got admin. I've got all these departments, and they all have their own measurements. In fact, one of the things that's happening now is that we're in a information overload age. We're now getting more data than we know what to do with. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we have now is we don't have processes in place. We have all this data, and each department is using the data that's associated with their activities, and that's what they're focusing on. And so we have all this data, you can only absorb so much, and then we're trying to get everybody to pull the same direction. We're in an unbelievably competitive market. We have all the challenges that are going out there. And yet at the same time, what we're running into is our drivers are still underperforming. You know, we have all the data in the world out there. Sometimes we're overloading them with the data. We don't have it in a process that's easy for the driver to understand. And you know, in my world, I like to keep it simple and stupid so Don can understand it. And I think a lot of times from the data world on the drivers, we're just giving them way too much data and not the capability of comprehending what does this data mean and taking this data and putting it in some sort of a context. That's very easy. I think, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but what we call about like a quarterback rating. If I'm a quarterback out there, I don't know all the stuff myself that goes into quarterback rating, but I know if I have a score over 100, I'm a pretty darn good quarterback. And we don't seem to see that at very many companies for the drivers. Another thing that we see on fragmentation out there is we see companies that'll have multiple bonuses. They'll have a bonus for running miles. They'll have a bonus for safety, and they'll have another bonus for fuel. And consequently, drivers are out there and they got 3 bonus systems, and lo and behold, you'll get drivers that are good in one area and not good in other areas, but they're still getting a bonus. And I think that's kind of a challenge. I think it kind of defeats the purpose. If I'm paying, for example, Mike, you're a driver of mine, and I'm paying you a bonus, and you're getting a bonus from productivity because you're running good miles, but you're getting terrible fuel mileage, and you're having accidents and tearing equipment up, but you're getting a bonus, and you're driving down the road thinking you're a really good driver because you're getting the bonus. Another thing that's happened recently is the Upper Plains Transportation Institute did a study on why good drivers were leaving companies. We talked about the fact that we have the driver shortage, and driver retention is critical. And it was really surprising. It wasn't pay and it wasn't benefits. And if you think about it, all those things anyway, or companies have X amount of money in their basket. So they're either going to pay more and have more benefits or vice versa, but the package for almost all companies is going to be similar. And it turns out that that wasn't the reason that drivers were leaving. Now, we're talking about good drivers.
Yeah, it's the good drivers, right?
Yeah, bottom 20% churners, that's not who we're talking about,
right.
Okay? But what is it with good drivers? Why are we suddenly losing good drivers? And the 3 things that this study came up with that I thought was very interesting was, 1, if they didn't have the skills to actually do the job. Well, if we have good, I'll give you an example. I've got a driver that's never ran flatbed. All of a sudden, he's going to run flatbed. He doesn't know how to tarp. He doesn't know how to secure loads for flatbed. He has the proper training. If we don't train him properly, if we don't educate him, if we don't do those things, he's going to end up quitting because he can't do the job. And I think a lot of times as companies, we just assume that whoever they worked for before trained him properly. And the reality is they probably didn't. And so we have drivers that are out there. They haven't had proper training, and we don't have a resource internally that says, hey, this driver's having a problem. What we have is the problem gets so bad that the driver gets in trouble or the driver quits. And now we've lost this driver. So if we had something in place that would tell us ahead of time that, hey, this driver's having a problem with this area, this driver's having a problem with their fuel mileage, or this driver's having a problem with productivity, or this driver's having a problem with logging, whatever it may be, if we have an alert system or something out there that can notify us and say, hey, this driver's having a problem, let's go fix it now. Let's do some root cause analysis and find out what's really causing it. And do we need to change our orientation? Do we need to change our training? What do we need to do to make sure it doesn't happen to other drivers? And consequently, the drivers, they just don't have the ability to do the job. We end up losing them. The second thing that popped up.
Or even worse, Don, they don't just quit, but they have a crash or something more.
They have a crash. And you know what? Before a driver quits, he's a cancer. That driver's out there telling all the other drivers about their problems. And I always talk about the guys in the back row of the truck stop. Anybody that's driven truck knows what I'm talking about. They seem to be the experts on everything, but they really don't know anything that's going on. They're the old performers, but they tend to be the experts. And unfortunately, they also tend to be the people that other drivers listen to. Why is that? Because the other drivers don't know what a good driver is either. The drivers are telling them they're a good driver. They believe that. They have no ability to know whether this gentleman's a good driver or not, or woman's a good driver or not. The second thing is that drivers will leave organizations if they don't feel good about what they're doing, just like anybody else. You want to feel good about what you're doing. And at many companies, the only time drivers ever hear from the company is when things are bad. You don't get compliments, you don't get told, or you get told you're doing a good job and you know you're not, but they're just telling you you're doing a good job. They're pacifying you, whatever it may be. And drivers want to feel good. Good drivers want to feel good about what they're doing. They need to know what a good job is. Back when I drove truck, I thought a good driver was a driver that delivered freight on time and didn't have accidents. That's what I judged myself on. Based on that, I thought I was a pretty good driver. The reality is I wasn't a very good driver at all. I probably didn't make a profit for my company. Now, delivering freight, not having accidents, I was good at that. But did I have good fuel mileage? Did I run the shortest routes? Did I communicate well? Was my paperwork right? Did I buy fuel on network? All these other things that are part of being a good driver, I had no clue that that's what a driver does. I just made up my own idea of what a good driver is. And so consequently, they can't feel good about their job if they don't know what a good job is, and the only time they hear from the company is when they're messing up. The third thing I thought was really interesting is drivers wanted an opportunity to advance within the organization in the role as a driver. We find very few companies out there that address this situation. If you're a good driver, how can you advance? What can you be? Can you be a bronze level, a silver level, a gold level, a platinum level? Can you be a driver trainer? What can you do to advance within your organization? And I think that's a void that's out there. And what happens is over time, if you're stuck in this same role, no chance for advancement, and your DNA is to be successful and to want to move up and be recognized for what you're doing, you have a tendency to just move on to the next organization. We talked about what kind of feedback are drivers getting, and I think a lot of times what we see is they get negative feedback on a regular basis. They know when they're not doing good. When they get a call, it's because there's a problem. They're not recognized for high performance. They're recognized for low performance. And I think as a result of that, the drivers, they're not as loyal. A little bit later, we're going to be talking about culture. We're going to talk about how do you build a culture in your organization, because if you really want to change, the driver situation and recruiting and retention and things like that, it's your culture. It's who you are. Are you doing things that make you best in class? Do you live best in class? Is that who you are? Do you have high expectations? And everybody within your organization, do they feel good because they're part of an organization that does that? And part of that is the ability to be recognized for high performance. Now, when drivers are going down the road, they've got a lot of complexity. I got safety screaming at me, worried about my CSA scores, and I'm getting hard brake alerts, and I'm getting, alerts are going into the company, and I'm getting a phone call, and then I got to watch my fuel mileage, and then I got to make my deliveries, and life's pretty complex. I'm out there on my own, and I don't have a lot of resources. Nobody's turning to me. I don't know if I'm doing good. I don't know if I'm doing bad. Well, I know I'm doing bad. I know I'm doing bad because you're calling me, right, Mike?
Yep.
But that's when you let me know what's going on. And then you got the driver dyslexia. Operations loves me, safety loves me not. I use that example. But in many organizations we go to them, we see a conflict between operations and safety. And, in the old days, they used to say operations generates revenue and safety restricts it, but we know a lot better than that now. We know that operations generates revenue, but we know safety retains the revenue. The world's changing. We can't do business like we did before. The secret is not constantly getting bigger, doing the same things we always did, just getting more drivers and more trucks and more drivers and more trucks. That's not going to be the answer of the future. But the answer is being better at what you do, being more profitable at what you do. If you're more profitable at what you do, you're going to have better benefits, you're going to have better pay, you're going to have better equipment, your culture, everything. That's what's going to draw and attract those drivers. And what you have to have is you have to have multiple departments. Everybody in each department, every driver, everybody has to be pulling in the same direction. It's not you do good for one company, one area of the department, but you don't do good in another. And then another area that we see that's a challenge, reviews, performance reviews. Some companies are lucky if they get an annual review done, which is basically running an MVR and get a certificate of violation signed, and they consider that a review. That's not a review. Drivers need regular reviews. They need regular feedback. They're no different than you and I, and we need feedback. We need to know if we're doing well. We need to know if we're not doing well so that we can correct behavior. And if we're not doing well, we need to have processes to try to figure out what's the real problem, what's the root cause, what's causing this. There's nothing. I talk about we in the operations department we'll take what used to be dispatchers and we call them driver managers, and it turns out they're not managing anything other than making sure they get miles and don't have any service failures, which is the goals of the operations department. Now, a driver manager should be managing a driver in all aspects of their job. And if you guys want to know whether or not you have that, take a couple hours one afternoon, stand outside your operations department and just watch what's going on. See how many driver managers are picking up the phone, calling drivers, and having conversations, proactive conversations about their performance and how they're doing, and recognizing good behavior, and putting goals down to correct negative behaviors, and trying to find root cause analysis for problems, versus the person who's just trying to get off the phone and wait for the next phone call. Here's an example. Driver calls in, I got a problem in safety. Okay, I'll transfer you to safety. Click. Driver's gone. I got a problem with the shop. Okay, click. I'm having a problem in click. Was that a real driver manager? Shouldn't a driver manager know all these things? Shouldn't a driver manager be involved in any conversation that driver has? Shouldn't a driver manager be managing that driver? Well, we may want them to manage that, but if we don't give them the tools, Mike, to do that, well, then we're creating a situation where they're going to fail too. So I'm going to ask you, simple question here. Who's your best performing driver? Who's your worst performing driver? Well, here's what happens. I go into operations. Who's your best performing driver? It's the driver who runs most miles. Never says no. Always gets delivery on time. I'll go into safety.
Takes those hot loads, right?
Takes those hot loads. It don't matter. They find a way to get it done. Love them. Best driver we got. And then you go into safety, and they're getting high CSA scores that are causing you to be on alert. You go into the shop to turn up your equipment. You look at their fuel mileage. It's the worst in the company. Admin can't process paperwork because it's not turned in properly or on time. But in the operations world, that's the best driver they've got. Conversely, I'll go into safety and say who's the best driver, and they're going to tell you it's the safest driver. Never has an accident. And then operations says, well, they ought to be safe. They won't run more than 500 miles a week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know that's an exaggeration, but that's what we see. It kind of depends on what part of your company, who you talk to, who the best driver is. The truth is, your best driver, everybody should be able to say who that driver is. When I walk up to a driver and say, how are you performing? He should be able to tell me exactly how he's performing, and did I do better or did I do worse than last month? And everybody's on the same sheet, and everybody recognizes that. So at this time, what I want to do, Mike, is I'm going to hand things back over to you and let you talk about our system.
Well, great, Don. Thank you. I guess that was a wicked problem. It may be like 10 wicked problems all built into one. And I've been watching Don. Don has been on this journey or mission for more than 15 years, he reminded me today. And it's been great. And we've been observing exactly how organizations and especially transportation companies are dealing with this wicked problem. And we've developed a system, a performance management system, which we're referring to as the Transportation DART system. And it's just that, performance management. I'm going to walk you through this quickly here and go through what we're referring to. And of course, DART is an acronym, and it stands for something. So D stands for defined. So when we look at defined, we're talking about, when it comes to performance, do we have expectation clarification? And that's not just for your drivers, right, Don? Absolutely. It goes all the way throughout the entire organization. I got to give some credit to Danny Baker, who uses this terminology, expectation clarification. He might even be on the line today, but it's crucial that we start with defining what performance means at our organization. And there's just this kind of simplicity in capturing the focus and clarity of your people when they know what's expected of them. So that's what the D stands for, is defined. Moving on, it's aligned is the second element of the DART system. And when we're talking about aligned, we're talking about the power of one. Here, performance standards that conflict, as Don was talking about earlier, create stress and excuses. And we hear a lot of excuses. Well, safety wants me to do this, ops wants me to do this. And that creates this conflict. And so we think a single score acts as an elixir to aligning organizational behavior with what? The mission or vision of where you want to go with your company. Very powerful. So alignment is crucial as part of the DART system. The next element is refined. Creating a culture of improvement. Don was talking about driver managers and how they're working with drivers to take performance to the next level. Performance isn't just about, you know, separating the good guys from the bad guys. That's easy. It's really this collective spirit about improving behaviors and refining the work that we do every day to get better. And that's a culture, right, Don? You've seen this. And then finally, the last element of the DART system is timed. And here we're talking about monthly dashboarding, not something terribly new. Scorecarding, dashboarding has been out there. It's out there. You're using it. But here we're talking about, you know, making sure that this is very visible. Performance that's invisible goes unaddressed. We all know that what gets managed gets done, right? So what's also important here, and the reason we call this timed, is that we need a regular interval of sharing results with your people. And so we believe that could be weekly, it could be daily, but we just found the sweet spot to be monthly. If we go beyond monthly, it becomes old news. And if it's too often, it becomes too frequent and almost noise. So we have gone to a monthly dashboarding, which seems to reach that sweet spot. So that's just an overview of what we've learned over the last 15 years, Don, and how we've come about with the DART system. So I want to walk through this with you, and I want you to think about this. You maybe have a piece of paper or your iPad in front of you, and we're going to break this down just a little bit more and talk about the 4 elements again. So expectation, clarification. I want you to think about your organization. How would you rate your definition of performance at your company? So on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're undefined, you might be a 0. A 0 is like performance depends on who you ask. And so a 10 would be expectations are very defined. And not only defined, but they're well known from top to bottom throughout the organization. So if you were to put your finger on that 5 and then go to what your score or rating would be within your company, would you be moving your finger to the left or to the right? So maybe on your piece of paper there, write down how you would rate defined performance at your company. Okay, so the next element, again, was alignment. Aligned. Either you're unaligned or very aligned. How would you rate your level of performance alignment within your organization? Don talked about conflict of goals. If you're a 0 or on the low side, you have each department has their goal, but they conflict. So a driver has that driver dyslexia situation. Or if you're way on the other side of the spectrum, performance goals go across the entire organization. Driver managers are aligned with drivers, department heads, and so forth, all the way up to the CEO. What kind of a rating would you give your organization there? Moving on to refined, a culture of improvement. How would you rate your ability to refine and improve performance? If you're unrefined, performance improvement is just not something you do. You really don't care. We don't share best practices, whereas on the very refined side, drivers and managers are collaborating. How can they improve fuel mileage, or how can they reduce accidents, improve CSA scores? A very collaborative culture of improvement. What would your rating be there? And then finally, the last element is timed. How would you rate your timing of performance feedback? We know from the research that people want to know how they're doing in a regular basis. So if you're untimed, performance reviews are done annually. And as Don mentioned, maybe that's just an MVR. I don't even know that that's a performance review. It is a review of sorts, but it's just looking at one element versus are employees knowledgeable, and are they aware, are getting feedback on their performance on a monthly basis. So go ahead and give yourself a rating for that one. And you may want to just tally those up real quick. Between the defined, aligned, refined, and timed, if you tally up your scores and you're in the 30s, you're doing a pretty darn good job. You probably have a very nice culture of performance and a performance management system that's probably yielding some dividends. If you're in the 20s, probably a little bit room for improvement. And if you're below that in the single digits, obviously there's some room for improvement there as well. And what really matters isn't what your score is. What really matters, and I think Don sees this when he's out talking to motor carriers, is are you committed to improving those scores? Because each of those elements of the performance management system are critical. If you just have 1 or 2 of those, it's not going to be as effective as having all 4. Would you agree with that, Don?
Yes.
Okay. Of course you do. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about are you a good fit. So we've talked about our transportation DART system, and we've taken a lot of the wisdom and knowledge that Don has gained, and all of our advisors, all of our people at HNI, we're very collaborative in sharing this. And we've found that this performance game, when it comes to transportation, generally comes down to 3 different categories. And we look at these categories very carefully because not only are they critical to defining performance, they're also typically the way you're set up in your company. So there's a safety category, and inside of that safety category there's certain measurements, as you can see on the screen. We also have an operations category, and again, productivity and some of the different types of scores and measures are inside of that operations. And the third element or third component is fuel. And fuel has become, a growing need because of, frankly, the cost of fuel. And so you can see some of the types of measurements inside of fuel. So those are the three types of metrics that we're using to create the system. And I just want to restate this. I love this this comment, because when I talk about the scorecard or dashboard, I always like to start out by saying, the purpose of a scorecard is not to measure performance. And I'll generally get kind of a perplexed look on people's face and like, well, what is it? We believe that the purpose of a scorecard is to change behaviors. And if we're not getting behavior change, or if you're not getting behavior change from the scorecards that you have posted in your driver room, then I think it's time to look at the DART system to see how can we put more power behind those scorecards and start to actually change behaviors. And I think that starts with getting that in front of the driver on a monthly basis. So Don, maybe you can talk a little bit about how that starts to look for the driver.
Yeah, here's a sample of what the measurement system would be for a driver. We try to keep it simple from the driver's view and the driver's arena. And in a second, Dominique will talk to you a little bit more about the managers and how you can dig down. But if you take, for example, this is what I'm looking at as a driver. I have a score of minus 116 points. I dropped 25 points since last month. It breaks down into operations. So if I'm a driver manager and I'm looking at this particular driver's score, if I'm a driver and I look at this score, I can say, all right, operations is a 19, safety is a minus 130, fuel is a minus 5. Does that in and of itself tell me what I need to do next? It could, but better yet is if you look to the right and say, how much did I change since last month? And yeah, I only have a 19 for operations. I dropped 20 points. But I went from a minus 5 to a minus 130 under safety. And I went from 0 to a minus 5 under fuel. Now, you can't fix everything. That's where you have to be careful. If you just start hitting these guys with everything in the world from all different angles, you're going to lose them. I'm a driver manager. I'm going to sit with this driver. Let's figure out the one thing. Let's go dig into safety. So I'm a driver manager, and what I would do is I start digging deeper into this system to find out what specifically happened on that driver. But it's given me a focus right there that says safety. We need to find out what happened on the safety side. Dominique, you want to take that next step?
Sure. So once you know what the driver score looks like, the driver is able to get that score. Managers obviously want to be able to see things at a higher level. So the platform a manager would use to take a look at all these scores is what you're seeing here. So from this, you can get a really quick sample of what's going on with the fleet. You can see some changes. You can see how patterns go over time, and you don't need to do a lot of analysis to do this. You're still looking at a summary of each of the operations areas, but it doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. But you can see patterns. For example, you can see here that your safety changed a little bit from December to January and a lot from the time before. Was there an initiative for the company set up at that time that changed those numbers? Was it a specific driver behavior? Another thing that's really interesting, and I'm a bit of a stats geek, so forgive me for that, is sometimes when you look at an average or you look at a score, it's actually showing a lot of high and a lot of low. Using this platform, you can click on those changes and see, was it a group of drivers that caused the issue? Was it a specific driver that had a bad score that brought it down? So you get a lot more insight into your analytics. So in this case, you can see there was a big improvement in safety, but operation scores dropped dramatically at the same time. And you can see that in the first 30 seconds. We didn't have to point that out. You could have seen it on your own. And that's one of the big advantages. Another advantage of being able to see this overview is frequently there are issues with data that's coming into a system. How do you know that the data that you have is accurate? How do you know that when you get your uploads and your downloads and your HR systems put together, how do you know that data is correct? In this pattern, you could see if something was way off, and you'd be able to look at it from month to month and actually correct the underlying data so you can have the best possible data and have the best ability to properly manage your drivers. Another nice thing about this is you can set up manager alerts for critical metrics. So for instance, if you're interested in seeing if miles per gallon goes up significantly and you want to have a faster way of getting that, you can set up these alerts that your managers can get those right away. and you can operate immediately so that you can make a change if you need to make a change.
This is one of my favorite parts here because, as Don said earlier, we've got all the data. We know we have all the information, but how can we make it easy for driver managers to get the data or the alert? So they don't have to think about it. They don't have to go find it. They're actually going to get alerted to either a high performer based on standards that they set or a low performer, someone that's dropping below. And that's something that you can catch early on.
And Mike, one thing I like about this, you just look at this screen that you're at right now, you see a sudden behavior change. So if I'm a driver manager and this is a history for my driver, something happened. I need to go back and figure out what happened to this driver. What happened in January? Was there something in his or her life that's changed? Something's critical. This driver's gone from a very good performer to a negative performer. And when I see a pattern like that, that means I'm going to get a hold of this driver now, and I'm going to start talking and digging and trying to find out what's going on, because I don't want to lose this driver. The driver has the ability to do well, but something out there's happened, and by getting this alert, that's going to trigger me. So that's the part of the retention capabilities of this is there's a problem, catch it, find out what's going on, adjust accordingly, and retain that driver, because otherwise that driver is just going to end up quitting out of frustration.
And I think another part to bring this full circle is it also allows you to see the good things that drivers are doing. So we're always talking about see a problem, fix a problem. Yep. Here's an opportunity to praise your drivers or even find out what those drivers are doing so they can share it with other drivers as an example. So I think that's really important too, back to the retention, getting that recognition in a timely manner as opposed to once a year. So this answers the question, who are your best and worst performing drivers, which is something that we asked at the beginning. Here we can see it's based on all these different categories. There's a lot of underlying scores that go into this, but you can pretty confidently say that in a balanced system, here are the people who are your top 10. So you can recognize those. And what you want to work on is probably your bottom level and see what are the opportunities or what differs between these types of drivers. One other thing that I wanted to say that I missed from before is when you're looking at different months, and looking at the scores for different months, something that you can do with that as well is refer it right back to your profitability those months. You can generate a lot of revenue without actually making any profit. If you know which variables your drivers have that make your company profitable, that helps you create a template for hiring the types of drivers who will fit into your culture, who will fit into the scoring, who will feel comfortable with what you're trying to accomplish as a company. And that can be very difficult to see. The thing that I like most about the system is it no longer relies on someone's gut instinct. I could be the best or the worst or whatever, but these numbers are standardized based on the data that's coming into the system. You only improve what you measure, and this is an opportunity to measure a lot of different things and see which things affect your profitability the most, which things affect your longevity the most.
You know, another thing about this is when we put measurements out there, we're not using subjective measurements, Mike. We're going to use objective. It's got to be something that's measurable, and it's got to be black or white. It's not, you can't measure attitude. You might be able to measure appearance if you wanted to, if you have a uniform policy or something like that. But these are objective measurements that we have out there. And the other thing, remember previously when I talked about having a 3 bonus system? Wouldn't it be nice to have a 1 bonus system? Because if I got a driver that's a little bit above average in each area, he's going to have a much better score than that driver who got a bonus in one area and was terrible in the other 2. And this is going to be tied directly to the profitability of the company because you're going to have points associated with how the company is performing.
I think even when we look at this, this really does strike some clarity as to who your best and worst are performing drivers. And I think, Don, you've always said this. I know we've watched this happen where the surprise that people have when they see who's on the higher performing list and who's on the lower performing list. Almost always there's a big surprise.
Well, inevitably, it's somebody that people didn't realize they were that good of a driver because that driver just comes in, does their job, does it well. They're never on the radar screen. They're not tooting their own horn. They're not looking for bragging rights. They're just very, very good at what they do. And conversely, Mike, if you're not able to recognize that behavior, you're going to lose that driver sooner or later because he's going to go to another company where they do.
Absolutely.
Probably something that people have been looking for is you would be able to get this information in any mobile device, so iOS, iPad, phone, iPhone, Android. There's a lot of different ways of getting it. So if you're on the road or if you want the alerts and you want them in real time, you don't have to be by your computer to get them. So that's just a nice feature.
So if I'm a driver, I'll get an alert? I mean, I'll get this monthly on my phone?
Well, the monthly report actually comes, the scorecard itself is emailed to the driver each month. So they don't get alerts. They have enough to deal with. But the managers who are managing the drivers are the ones that would get alerts. And that's actually another nice thing is, although you were putting all the data in, you don't have to worry about getting the cards to each of the drivers. That happens automatically, and they have the ability to look at it at any time during the month.
You mean I don't have to print and put these in mailboxes and hand them out every time, and drivers are just getting them through email?
Exactly,
That's
unless
awesome.
you really want to, but
awesome.
you probably don't.
Great. So yeah, Don, that was the management system. Those are the tools that we put in the hands of the driver managers and the management team at the organization. So we're going to start to move now into, you know, how do you eat this elephant? How do you actually, this all sounds good, but you know, in reality, we still have a business to run, and how are we going to take this from where we're at today to where this becomes a real performance management system? So Don, you know, you've talked about culture. It's one of your hot topics. What else do we have to do here to kind of make this thing come to fruition?
Well, you know, we talk about, you know, building of a culture. I think there's so many of us in management and ownership and top management that, you know, we just don't spend enough time working on this high-end stuff like this. I mentioned it before. We end up falling back into the daily routines and things like that. But that culture is so critical. I mean, if you're going to want drivers in the future, your culture is what's going to attract drivers. It's not how much you advertise. It's not what you say. It's who you are. And then those drivers are going to talk to other drivers. And that's how you get the good drivers. And this culture is throughout the organization. It's not just you. It's your driver managers. It's your department managers. You know, what this does is this gives you total alignment. It's everybody's going the same direction. Every department, everybody's working together. You know, one of the things that comes out of this program is that driver manager becomes an unbelievably important role within your organization. And for example, I came from the operations and risk management world, but when I was in the risk management world, what should be happening there is that driver manager needs to be involved in my conversations with that driver, not just send the driver to me and I'll take care of that problem. That driver manager is now responsible for that driver. And you know what happens? That driver manager's scores are tied to the same scores as the driver. So instead of these guys being in conflict with each other, they're together. I'm a driver manager, Mike, you're a driver. We're talking about what we're going to do together to make these scores get better. And then what happens in some of the other departments, for example, in risk management safety, I can have those departments focusing on proactive. I can have them working on management systems, analyzing data, root cause analysis, looking at the data, finding out the patterns that are happening out there, and then training my driver managers. So when a driver calls in, has a situation, or we need to focus on something, that driver manager is having that conversation. That's how critical that role becomes. If I'm a driver manager, that's what I need to be. I need to be somebody that says, I'm going to take this on, I'm going to take this challenge on, and I'm going to learn everything that I can. If I have a driver that has to talk to safety, I'm going to be on that phone call too. Because the next time that happens, I can probably take care of that myself because I understand it. And I'm going to work with safety and say, hey, safety, these are things I need help with. This is stuff I need training on. This is stuff that we need to be working together. And same in operations, the same, you know, on the MPG, all that stuff. I'm going to take all those things to it. So you're probably thinking in terms of, excuse me here, where do you find a return on investment? The return on investment, I mean, something as little as a 3% improvement in your fuel is going to be more than the return on investment that you could ever imagine. And fuel, you know, you think fuel's pretty simple. Fuel's three things. It's fuel mileage, idle time, and if you have a fuel network, and if you don't have a network, we need to get you one, but it's purchasing on network. If you got a driver doing those three things, and you get all your drivers, it's not just your best drivers, but now you got the people on the bottom. You know, we've had clients that have used this program, and they've got specific trainers that are really good at fuel. So when a driver's having a problem with fuel, they'll bring that driver in and have that trainer retrain him, go through, show him all the proper ways to do a progressive shifting, actually analyze the data before the driver gets in, and find out, is it his idle time, is it his driving time, is it his high end? Is it his low end? Is it progressive shifting? Is he dropping a gear and high end to have speed? You can figure all that data out, but this tells you where to go. This tells you this is what I need to look into, and so you can have trainers that work with these guys, because the profit in your company is the bottom in each of these areas. It's bringing the bottom up, Mike. It's not pushing the top further. It's bringing the bottom up. That's what's going to make the huge difference, and it ends up changing how we do it. The other challenge that you have is, are you a good fit? Well, let's be honest with yourselves. You need to step back. You need to look at yourself. You need to look at your organization. There's going to be, Mike, there's going to be people out here that are going to look at this, and they're going to say, that's me. That's it. That's what I want. That's what I've been needing all along. Hallelujah. And you know what? Those people are a good fit. You're going to have other people say, you know what? I don't know if I want to invest the time. Maybe I just might want to try it. Well, if you just might want to try it, you don't need to do this, because your heart and soul has to be in this, because it has to come from the top. It has to come from ownership and the top management team. They have to be the people that say, this is the pattern. You know, we understand that the measurement system itself is a cornerstone of the whole driver performance process. That it's an entire process of which the measurement system is just the cornerstone. And so, you know, scheduling time when the scores come out for people to report how their scores did better or worse, putting together corrective action forms where the driver and the driver manager sit down, maybe take the worst 10% or 5%, whatever it is, and each month they're sitting down and they're filling out these corrective action forms. It says, as a driver manager, this is what I'm going to do to help this driver, and here's what the driver says he's going to do to help this driver. And we're going to put that in writing, then we're going to shoot it up to the top of the company. Every top manager and ownership is going to sign that, and it's going to come back to this driver that says, all these people are watching you and me. We need to make sure we get this done. And then you have to make sure that as a leader that you're making sure that the people in your organization understand that we're not in this. Is it a perfect system? No, but it's a pretty darn good system. It's a system that we've got. It's going to work for us. We're not in this to look for mistakes. We're not looking for excuses. And if you're not willing to get on this wagon and run with this, because as leadership, this is where our company is going to go, then you need to make sure that that's corrected. And if you've got those things, if you really want to do this, and this really trips your trigger, then it's a good fit and it'll work for you.
Great. So remember, some of you are typing in some questions, which is great. We're going to start to field some of those questions right now. So go ahead and type in a question in that chat box if you have one. I'm going to throw this one out here right now, and that is, you know, we already have a bonus system in place, and the question is, how will this be different than a typical bonus where we have a fuel bonus or productivity bonus?
Thanks. Well, what we normally do, Mike, is we're going to go to the organization and say, what do you have for a bonus program now? How many dollars are you paying out a year into your bonus program? And then when we complete the analytics side, when we complete the measurement side of the system here, we're going to take those numbers and we're going to figure out how we take the same dollars now, plug them into that system, and historically what we try to do is make sure the people at the top are getting significantly more bonus than they were before, and the ones at the bottom are getting significantly less. But we take that and we transfer that into that system so that we're not spending money that we don't have, right? But what happens is as you're writing more bonus checks in the future, it's because you're making more money. So it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, so this is kind of a follow-up on that very same topic. This question is really around, while you're talking about giving the driver information on a monthly basis, are you also giving them money based on those results? Do you recommend paying on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, or something different?
That's interesting. We generally have 3 phases to this system. The first phase is putting together the measurements. The second phase is putting together the operational side. How are we going to get the numbers improved, the corrective actions, the different department scores and things like that. And then phase 3 is usually the bonus system, and that's where we're going to sit with the company and discuss it. Money's nice. Reality is money's here today, gone tomorrow. What are you going to give me next? We've got one company out there that drivers are getting pretty close to 17% of their earnings is available in bonus through this program. That's significant. That's enough money to change behavior. Some companies use it for driver of the month, driver of the year programs. Some companies will set up high achievers clubs. One of the things that we'll do with a high achievers club is we'll say X number of points. So let's say, I'll just throw some out there, 100 points or higher puts you at the bronze level, 150 or higher puts you at the silver, higher than 175 puts you at gold. And when we did that, it was 10%, 25%, and 40% of the fleet. Well, we're not going to do like they do on CSA. You guys all hate CSA because it's a bell curve and you compare it against your peers and stuff like that. It's a moving target. What we're going to do is that's the number. And our goal is to have 40% of our drivers at gold. And what you can do is have different awards for the different levels. So there's all kinds of different things that we can do on the bonus side, and that's kind of the fun part is when we sit down with that, looking at all the different ways that things can be done, all the different ways that we can recognize behavior, positive behavior, and take it from there.
Great. Next question, Don. Any recommendations of a driver evaluation form that a motor carrier can use or refine to use for driver evaluations?
Well, I don't have anything right off of that. It's a good question. I guess
maybe it's the driver.
Yeah, well, I would think the scorecard itself, or the performance measurement system itself, is going to be the evaluation system, because once you have that, you've got your critical success factors. You'll be able to see how they score against the average score for your company. So our average score for your fleet, if you're a driver manager, it's all broken down. So you could certainly use this in that capacity. I would much rather have something like that than something that I pass around and we evaluate people on their attitude and how well they did in this department or that. So this whole system just kind of feeds that.
Great. You know, this is kind of what could go wrong, Don. Will my drivers leave if we start to measure them against performance standards?
Yeah. It's always an interesting area. It's we have not experienced drivers, companies that were having any turnover, massive turnover, or anything as a result of this. Now, some of it's going to be how do you roll it out? You know, you just don't. One day we have it, the next day we don't. One day we don't have it, the next day we have it. Oh, by the way, you have really bad scores. You know, it's planning the rollout system. It's educating. It's getting everybody to understand, you know, why we're doing this. You know, we talked about the culture. It's building that culture. That organization says we are best in class. We're going to be best in class in everything we do. We're going to be best in class on CSA scores. You want drivers to get good scores on CSA? It's not disciplining. It's not punishing them. It's getting them to understand why is that so important that we be best in class. Well, that's who we are. And so I think if you address things from those perspectives, you're not going to have a problem with turnover. The other thing is you're going to lose drivers that aren't performing well because they're just going to be quitting because they're frustrated and you're not helping them and you're not doing anything to gain it. So I think there's a pretty good checks and balance on that says, you know what, Mike, you might be, don't leave. We already caught this ahead of time. Let's sit down and make this really good so you can feel good about what you're doing instead of you 2 months from now quitting.
Yeah, no, along those lines too, a question where we're looking for drivers. You know, we have a driver shortage. We need to hire more drivers, and now we're making it, you know, we're putting this performance system in place. You know, may we be weeding out certain drivers from flow? And I think the answer is kind of obvious here, is that you're probably going to attract higher performing drivers than the low performers. Low performers may not apply.
Right. Well, and the other thing, Mike, as a manager, I want to make sure I've done everything I possibly can to make sure that that employee has the ability to be productive and successful in my company. When they came to work for me, they're risking their time, their family, their life, you know, their lifestyle. They're giving that to me. And I want to make sure I've done everything in my power to make sure that you had a chance to be successful. And if I don't do that, then that's shame on me. Now, if I do that and you don't, and if it doesn't work, well, then that's on you.
Great. Next question. How long does the process take to develop this system? I think we've seen this one. Now, this has been over 15 years. It's taken, some of us have taken longer than others, but the idea behind this really was to lean out the process because it can be daunting, no question about it.
I'll start off and I'll let Dominique finish on it, but when we first started this 15 years ago, it was 2 or 3 years. It was actually insane how long it took, and we've run into so many challenges, And the things that we were running into, lack of commitment from ownership, lack of commitment for time from IT. We were using so much of the IT's time that they weren't able to do other parts of their job. And so taking all that into consideration, HNI, we've made a huge investment. I'll let Dominique here talk in a second, but we've made a huge investment into resources and capabilities to speed that process up and feel pretty comfortable that we've got that down. What do you think, Dominique?
I think our goal with this product was to keep it simple, to allow it to absorb data from as many systems as possible. And the way we did that is, in the short term, what it does is, as long as you can get a clean, extracted source of data that has what we need in it, we're able to put it into a standardized database and then run basically algorithms on that to come up with the scores. So a lot of the questions around what should my expectations be in terms of rolling out would be, how clean is your data, and do you know where it is? That being said, an important part of this project really is discovering where is that data, what does it look like, because we've seen some opportunities that people have had to clean up the data or finding out that data was missing. And that's part of this as well, is finding places where things aren't correct. But a lot of it is really around, do you know where your data is it easily extractable? Because if it is, then that has the biggest impact on how long it takes. And also how knowledgeable you are with the data, because we can help you with that, but it helps if you kind of know a bit to begin with.
So if you have a situation where the data is good, the data is clean, everything's in place, which I'll be honest, we don't run into that. We find something, and that's why we brought people like Dominique into this program. One of the things, make sure everybody understands that we're not going to come in and be your IT department. We can't do that, but we have so much capability on the IT side to work with your IT people, and we're working with all these different systems and learning how to pull data out of the various systems that are out there, that it's going to speed it up. I mean, if everything's there and all the data is there, I'm thinking within a couple of months, maybe even less, depends how often we meet. But that's if everything's clean. I think you have to come to that with open eyes. The good thing is we're going to clean up bad data, and that's significant. When you're in a pennies, nickel, dime profit business and you're making decisions off of bad data, that can come back to haunt you. So if that's the case, it just depends on how much it's going to take to dig into that.
And just to add on to that, most major systems, PeopleNet, TMW, whatever it happens to be, do have ways of extracting data generally into a generic format that we can use. So that gives us a nice clean stream of data that you don't have to touch as much, but we do have manual options and templates if that's something that works best.
That actually answers about 3 questions, as some people were asking where this data can come from. Does it interact with other sources like TMW,
yeah.
PeopleNet?
And just to clarify, at this point we aren't running any web services to pull it directly, but what we can do is help you get a data stream from those that's clean, that we can then either in a comma delimited format or whatever format works for you, we can grab it the same way. So there'd be that one-time process of figuring out where it is, what it looks like, and then we bring it in, we standardize it, and after that it's just I extract it once a month, we find a way to securely get it to our location, and then we download it. And this is also kind of nice because no matter what your system is, we can accommodate that with that sort of transitional process between the systems.
Great. Here's a question. How many metrics do you suggest for a scorecard dashboard?
Well, I think the example that you showed us back there was a pretty good scenario on the metrics. I think we had anywhere from 5 to 7 under safety, 3 or 4 under, I think it was 5 under productivity, and 3 under fuel. So here you go. Under safety, we were looking at logs, accidents, citations, CSA roadside inspections, and then we can add overspeed, top speed, and hard brakes if you have those capabilities. On operations, we're going to look, and what's nice about this, you have all your different systems out there. They measure one thing. Other people have scorecards. It measures their product. What we do here is we're pulling everything together and looking at all of it. So on the operations side, we're going to look at productivity. We're going to look at service failures. We're going to make sure that paperwork's turned in on time and completed out properly. Out or out, we attribute to things for longevity. And then under fuel, it's usually MPG idle times and purchasing on network if you have a network. If you don't have a network, we're going to work with you to get you one because that's critical in controlling fuel.
Great. Well, we're running out of time here, so there's a few more questions on there, but what's on there more often than not is, will this presentation be available? And the answer is yes. On the screen you'll see a web link where you can go to, and that will be up shortly. Our marketing department will have that up. So I would encourage you to, once you get that link and that download, is to go back and meet with your team. Go through the 4 elements of the DART system: defined, aligned, refined, and timed, and look at how you're doing. I mean, if you're in the 30s, your scores are in the 30s for those 4 elements, then you're probably doing a very good job. But the real goal here is how do you take that to the next level? And so if you'd like to see a demo, a customized demo with you and your team, we can either go through your scoring, see how you're doing, or go through this in more detail, and also get into the final question that's been asked here, which is, how much does this cost? And we can get into that with you personally. But what we wanted to do today was introduce you to how you can take all of this data, big data as it's referred to, and really turn that into a very powerful performance management tool that you can start to change behaviors in your organization. And I know that I've seen this happen where we look at measuring performance, and then once the drivers and the driver managers are aware of that expectation and what performance means, we see a spike. We see a spike in the scores, which obviously relates to performance and hopefully, if not always, the bottom line. And that's what it's all about. So creating more value for your organization. So with that, I want to thank Dominique and Don for a very insightful conversation today. If you have any more questions, please reach out to us. And thank you for joining us for this HNI University event.